Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Billy. I am one of the co-directors of the public trainings team at Rising Organizers, and very happy to have you all here. I see some familiar faces from the last training we had in the first part of this three-part series from 2 weeks ago. So excited to have you here.
And is that over to me, I guess? I'm Gabrielle. I use she, her pronouns. I'm from Washington, D.C., and I am the alignments team co-lead with the Sunrise Movement DC Hub. And I'll pass it over to Naeem to introduce himself.
Yeah, what's up, everybody? My name is Naeem. I use he, him pronouns, but any pronouns are fine. I am also with Sunrise DC, like Gabrielle, and along with Gabrielle, I'm going to be one of your trainers for today. So it's going to be super exciting to talk to y'all and get to know y'all a little bit and talk about electoral organizing, which I hope everybody is here for. I also want to pass it off to Katie and some of the other staff on this call who are making it happen. So Katie, you got this.
Hey y'all, I just want to welcome you to the space. Super stoked to be here. I also want to take a tiny minute of thanks for the team in general that has been working on these trainings for the past 3 weeks. Gabrielle, Naeem, Jeremy, Alyssa, Billy, Nancy, and I have had such fun working together to make these possible for you, but please give us tons of feedback about what you want to see in the future, because we're trying to build that future, right? I'm one of the co-training directors or co-directors for training at Rising Organizers. They, she pronouns, stoked to see you. Gonna pop it over to Nancy. Thanks, y'all.
Hey everyone, I'm Nancy Leon, another one of the co-directors on the trainings team at Rising Organizers. Excited to see you all here. I'm also from Maryland, and been working really hard to put these trainings on for y'all. So just excited that you're here and ready to learn with us. I think the last person is Alyssa.
Yes, hello. My name is Alyssa. I'm the executive director of Rising Organizers Action and Rising Organizers, our education arm, and just excited to be with all of you today. I'm in DC in my heart and my rent, but I'm currently located in Maryland.
Great. Well, without further ado, let's get started. Could we go to the next slide? Awesome. So this is going to be some similar information for a lot of you who have attended our past trainings, both with Sunrise and Rising Organizers. But again, this is a three-part series. If you missed last week or the week before, no worries. We have all of those recordings. We can absolutely send them your way. So you can make sure that you haven't missed out on information. So before we get started today, we're going to do a sort of a quick run through of who our organizations are. So Rising Organizers was founded back in 2016, right after the election, to provide free trainings to new and emerging activists and leaders who wanted to take action for the first time after a disastrous presidential election. So we put trainings on and a fellowship program several times a year, which are all free just because we know that there can be some significant barriers to joining progressive activism. We want to make sure those barriers don't exist. We know that trainings can be expensive. Some folks might feel like they need to be qualified to come out to a training, might need all of this background knowledge, degrees, certifications, but you don't. You really just need a passion and sort of a willingness to learn. The other group here is Sunrise. It's been really great to work with them. So Gabrielle, Naeem, and Sunrise as a whole was founded in 2017 to put pressure on elected officials to end the climate crisis and also to create millions of good paying jobs in the process through Green New Deal legislation. And so the Sunrise DC Hub partakes in recruitment, trainings, direct actions, partnerships work, so like what you're seeing right now, and much, much more to both advance this goal and then also to fight for local racial and economic justice issues here in DC. So we're super excited to have you. And to echo Katie's point, It's just been a really great partnership, and we're excited to have you here for it. So why are we partnering? Again, a lot of repetitive information for some of you, but essentially we're partnering on these 3 trainings, all focused on making issues electoral, because we at RO, at Rising Organizers and Sunrise, we think there's a problem, generally speaking, where community organizers are really good at getting people out and into the streets, but they rarely get new leaders elected into office. There's sort of that gap there. And at the same time, political organizers are great at getting people elected, but they rarely get people in the streets taking mass action. So we're kind of like combining these 2 sectors to share our strengths and also to kind of like talk about our challenges and ways we can grow. So the solution, we think, is to really fuse both of these. They have to be one and the same. That's how you build the pressure and the power you need to make politicians take action. So you present them with a crowd of people that can't be ignored. So for those of you who came out last week, we talked a lot about that. And we demand the politician or politicians to take action, or else we'll vote them out. So it's a combo of the 2. And of course, like I said, so generalizations. This isn't true for everyone, but something that we've noticed in our past work. So getting started for today, hop on mute, turn on your video. We'd love to see you from all over the country. Turn on gallery view in the top right corner so you can see everyone. You already dropped your names and your pronouns, where you're calling from. Excited to have a lot of you here today from all over the country, on West Coast, East Coast, and everything in between. If you have questions, please share, post in the chat, come off of mute when the trainers let you know it's okay to, but always feel free to post in the chat. We have Troll Watch, so there will be someone that is expressly going to be looking at the chat, making sure that there aren't any trolls. If there are trolls, take care of yourself, especially if we go into breakout sessions and you notice that something's not right. Feel free to leave that breakout session, post something in the chat, and we'll take care of it. The last thing that we're going to do, or a couple of important things we're going to do before we get started today, is first to give a land acknowledgement. And so this is something that we've done in a lot of our trainings at RO and also at Sunrise. So a land acknowledgement is recognizing that the United States was established on native land. And we, as your presenters, as your trainers, are in DC, Washington, DC, which is Piscataway land, and land where Native people continue to live and continue to inhabit to this day. So we want to acknowledge the continued resilience of Native people in their continuing struggle for liberation, and just want to acknowledge that history. The second thing we want to do is we want to acknowledge and mourn the loss of George Floyd and so many other Black lives stolen by white supremacist actions in these last couple of months alone. And, the injustice we've seen with Breonna Taylor, we want to take the opportunity and the time to say that, our hearts and our support go out to Black people everywhere. And, that's what brings us here to this work. And so today we stand in solidarity with all Black people demanding justice, and that their voices be heard. Taking a deep breath and exhaling. So great. I think without further ado, we're going to move on to the norms. So some norms that we have in all of our trainings. We don't have all the answers. We'd like to think we do. We don't. But we do have the tools to teach you that will help you find your own. Be nice. Just generally speaking, be nice to us. Be nice to the trainers. We're all volunteers. We're not getting paid to do this. We're doing this because we love the work. But be nice to each other too. Again, want to remind everyone we have a staff member on Troll Watch. So let us know if there are any garbage people in here. The other thing is what's said here stays here, but what's learned here leaves here. So we want to respect confidentiality if folks are sharing some vulnerable things and stories in the chat or breakout groups, but absolutely we want to make sure that all of the lessons we learn here today leave with us and we actually implement those. And last but not least, participate. You know, we had a really awesome, lively bunch last week, and we want to keep that going. So we have interactive activities planned for you in this training. Success of this training, in our eyes, really hinges on and relies on you all participating. So we look forward to seeing that. So before we move on to the meat and the nitty gritty, are there any other norms you all would like to see? We had some people post last week. So we're going to give you a few seconds to post in the chat if there are any other norms that you would like us to live by, us as in the trainer, staff, but also your fellow participants. I'll give you all a couple of seconds. And Rodrigo, no worries at all. If you have to leave early, we can always send you the recording.
Thank you so much. Sorry about that.
Yeah, it's okay. Life happens. One diva, one mic. Love it. Don't speak over each other. Respect each other's voices. Great. Anything else? Great. All right, we can go on to the next slide. So today's agenda, we're going to review a little bit. We'll talk about what we've covered last week and the week before. We're then going to talk about building relationships with candidates, so folks running for office, and then also those who are already in office. And last but not least, campaigning techniques to win. How do we actually eke out wins? So ultimately, we're going to learn how relationships help ground movements and candidates, and how to help them and your issues win.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Billy, for that introduction. Yeah, so we've got some excited stuff planned for you all today. And yeah, I'd love to hand it off to Gabrielle to talk a little bit about reviewing the other parts of the training that we did in the past. So you got this, Gabrielle.
Sure, thanks, Naeem. Yeah, just a quick review of the last two sessions in case you missed them. So in the first session, we talked about movement building and building power. So we talked about what power is and how we get it. And we learned the difference between money power and people power, as well as how to build our base through one-on-ones and relationship building, both internally and with other groups. We also went into, in our second training, what makes a successful action. So this training focused on nonviolent direct actions, and we defined what activities are versus actions, and components of a successful action, which in Sunrise we define as sacrifice, disruption, and participation. And we also discussed primary versus secondary targets. And so primary targets are those like politicians, who are those that hold the power. And then secondary targets would be the public. And those are the people that hold power over those who hold the power. And so in any action, you can target one or both, often both of these actors. And so that's just some of the things that we discussed in the first two parts, but we'll also be sharing recordings from both parts so that everyone can take a look and review if they missed. And if anyone wants to share anything that they learned from the first two trainings, I'll give a minute for people to share in the chat. If people want to give examples of money power versus people power, we gave some good examples in the first training, or any examples of either what we talked about as successful actions or actions that they've attended. And so I'll give a few seconds for people to share some of those. And I can share those links in the chat. So those are the links to the first two trainings. Yeah. And just to share some examples of people power versus money power, which is a really important aspect of what we'll be talking about today, as well as what we talked about in the past. People power is Sunrise movement. It is organizing community grassroots movements on the ground that organize people to take action together versus money power, which is often, in the form of a lobbying organization such as a fossil fuel lobby or the NRA, which uses money in order to lobby politicians to get what they want. And so that's just some review, set the groundwork, and I think we can start getting onto what we're doing today. And so I'll give it back to Naeem to get us started.
Yeah, thanks, Gabrielle, for that really important review of what we talked about prior, right? Whenever you want something, whenever you want an issue that is electoral to you, that you can affect if only your elected officials would listen to you, right? You definitely need people. You definitely need organizing to get the action to make it happen, right? And so direct action, as Gabrielle mentioned, is actually super important. When you have these big protests, these sit-ins, these office visits, maybe in COVID times you visit their house instead of their office, to put pressure on these elected officials and to show the public whether or not they're really on your side, right? Those actions are really effective. And the reason we put this picture up here is that, as you can see from this picture, through direct action, through sit-ins, through office visits, we got something like 100 elected officials in Congress to support the Green New Deal, which I'm sure you all have heard of. And so, that's really great. That is no small achievement. But the fact remains that there's still a lot of elected officials who didn't sign on to the Green New Deal, even though we showed up to their offices, even though we put political pressure on them in a very public way. And so the question becomes, what about the rest, right? What about all those people who didn't sign on? Why do we think that they didn't support this, right? Why do we think that they didn't sign on to the Green New Deal even after all that pressure? Gabrielle Loki, we can wait, we can go back for a sec. Gabrielle Loki dropped the answer, but I'm curious if anybody has any idea why. So if you want to drop in the chat, I'm looking for one word that could be the reason why somebody wouldn't support the Green New Deal. Sloth. I don't know if, okay, there we go. I'll take, I'll take, I don't know exactly what is, maybe sloth is part of it. Political donors. Okay, yeah, money, right? Yeah, thank you, Steve and Justin. Yeah, let's hop to the next slide. So yeah, a lot of the reason of why an elected official chooses to support or not support an issue that you want them to support comes down to their self-interest. What is it that motivates them to take action or to not take action, right? And as Steve and Justin alluded to, for some elected officials, like Pelosi there, for instance, the motivation, the self-interest is power and money. Whereas you have other elected officials, on the other hand, like AOC, right? They're both Democrats, but AOC is motivated by living out her values, right? And you can really see the difference if you think about how they run their campaigns and how they do their work. You have AOC on the one hand only taking money from small dollar donors, from plumbers, electricians, teachers, whoever else, and then she supports policies that benefit those people, like the Green New Deal, like Medicare for All, and so on. On the other hand, you have Pelosi, who's taken more than $1 million in the last 2 years alone from real estate developers, from big banks, from billionaires, from corporations, even from the fossil fuel lobby. And you can see that she doesn't fight for us, right? She fights for the people who give her money because that's what motivates her. So the question for us becomes, how do you persuade somebody who takes that much big money to do the right thing? How do you persuade all of those Pelosi's? Does anybody want to take a guess in the chat? I could tell you the answers to all these questions, but like, I love hearing what y'all think. All right, well, I'm gonna tell you. You can go to the next slide. So the answer, okay, true, that's not a bad guess actually, Steve. Yeah, you can also, whenever we ask like these rhetorical questions, you can always unmute and answer as well. We definitely want to hear your thoughts. Yeah, Steve brings up expose the money connection. That's actually not a bad idea. And that's something we try to do through direct action, right? But like, what happens when they don't even respond to that, right? I have a shirt that says no fossil fuel money. I wore it to Pelosi's office as part of a big action, and she didn't react. But yeah, it's kind of a trick question, right? Because it's like, we've tried all of that, right? So the answer becomes, how do we persuade them? We can't persuade them, right? We can't. Because when somebody is just too far gone, when an elected official is too corrupt, when they've taken too much money and they're beyond a point of no return, really the only option left to us is to replace them with somebody who's better, right? Replacing them with somebody who's actually going to fight for you. Because you would think, right, that if an elected official is actually motivated at all by caring about your votes and by caring about you, that when you put pressure on them and show them you really care, that they'll listen. If they don't even care about that, what they're showing is that no matter what you do, this particular person is not going to have you as part of their self-interest. So yeah, that's when it's time to vote them out. And we're going to talk a little more about that. Next slide. Let's see, I'm trying to read the chat. Yeah, that's an interesting point about HR1, if you all want to discuss that in the chat. Yeah, so in a lot of ways, a relationship with an elected official, just like any relationship, relies on accountability and communication. And what do we do when elected officials don't really get the message, right? How do we continue to hold them accountable? Well, there's a few ways to do that, and we're going to talk about those. So what's the strategy here, right? With the elected officials who are willing to fight for us, who are on our side, who are willing to show up for us and who trust us, who support the Green New Deal, who support defunding police and so on. We want to build relationships and visibility and trust with them, because that's how we eventually build bills together with them and get those laws enacted, right? That's really important. It's important to work with your allies in the legislature. But for people who are your opponents, people who are less like AOC and more like Pelosi, people who haven't responded to direct action, our only strategy there is to vote them out. And I mean that for primary elections, we mean that for general elections too, because you kind of have to win both, right? Let's say that you have a corporate Democrat, right? Somebody who's not fighting for you running in a primary election against a Democrat who is, right? Think like AOC and AOC's opponent, right? Way back when. Those primary elections matter too, because that's how you get the candidate who's actually fighting for you to advance. In many cases, if they don't even make it past the primary, it's going to be impossible for them to win in the general. So our strategy is that we want to vote out the elected officials who aren't on our side, and both of those kinds of elections matter. And if anybody has any questions, you can drop a star in the chat at any time, like so. And if that fails, Justin, we're going to talk about that, but we're also going to talk about when it succeeds. All right, yeah, I don't want to spoil the ending. But the bottom line, though, of this is that in so many ways, people power comes down to building political power. How many people you can get together, organize, taking action is going to directly translate to how much you are able to get those electoral goals, Green New Deal, defund the police, cancel rent, whatever it may be for you, enacted. And last time we talked about how people power translates into direct action, which is one way that this manifests, right? But when that doesn't work, people power also turns into all of those people who you're reaching out to, telling them, hey, it's time to vote for somebody else. So let's get together, let's call all our friends and neighbors, let's organize, and let's get more people on our side. Because if we want to get the issues that we want in place, right? If we want to pass the laws that we want, we need to get the elected officials in office that we want, who are going to pass those measures. So yeah, there's a translation there, and I'm going to hand it off to Gabrielle to lead us in a breakout about that.
Yeah, thanks, Naeem. So Naeem's been talking a lot about elected officials and candidates. So I want to take 5 minutes just to break out into small groups to discuss elected candidates or officials in our own communities and what commitments they may have taken to shift our towards our community needs. And so Naeem is going to put us in rooms in just a minute. So take 5 minutes to introduce yourselves, get to know each other a bit and share your stories, but also answer these questions of who have we elected that has or has not committed to the shifts your community needs, and who are candidates that you're watching in your community. And these can be national candidates, they can be local candidates, anywhere along that spectrum. And if you don't know any candidates, that's okay. We're all here to learn. You can take a few minutes to listen. So Naeem, I think we're ready to get broken up into groups. And when we come back, we'll take a few minutes just to share back.
Right on. So they should be open, the rooms. If you don't get a notification, let me know and I'll put you into one. and we will reconvene in 5 minutes. In the meantime, when you get that notification, just click it and it'll take you there.
Yeah, as people start trickling in, if anyone would like to hop off mute or share in the chat some of the interesting things they discussed in their breakout groups, I'd love to hear what you guys came up with. So any examples of candidates or issues, feel free to unmute or post in the chat. And I'll give you guys like a minute for that. Sorry,
Okay,
go.
I'll go ahead. So I was a big part of electing almost all of the Democratic candidates for city council, and one of our at-large representatives said some not great things about Black Lives Matter protests, and so I provided her with some resources and different things to change her opinion on it, and now we are looking into alternates to policing. So that was, I felt pretty good about that because I took direct action towards her, and I was a large part of her campaign and getting her reelected, and I made sure she realized that a lot of us in the area were unhappy with her talking points that she was saying.
That's amazing, Grace. Thank you so much for sharing. Naeem is dropping some plus signs in the chat. We do that in Sunrise when we resonate or want to show some love for people. So emojis work just as well. But if you want to drop plus signs too, that's really cool. Can I ask where you're from, Grace? Are you in DC?
I'm from northern Indiana, like half an hour from South Bend.
Very cool. I was like, I don't remember that from DC.
No.
But that's really cool. Yeah, we'll definitely be talking about personal relationships and how we can build internal accountability with our elected officials through dialogue with them. So that's like a really great example. Yeah, I guess next slide. Let's move on. Let's keep going. Nancy, next slide. Thanks. Yeah, so some things we'll be talking about now are building trust. So how do we go about doing an endorsement and campaigning for our candidate? And also, what even are those things? Some must be new to that, but also we talk about endorsements and campaigning. You may have heard those words before, and there's also some misconceptions around them. So we'll be discussing some good tools. So next slide. Here we can see some examples of endorsements that Sunrise DC has made. So on the left, we have a picture of Denise Lewis George for Ward 4 of DC City Council, and she was the first person that we endorsed. That was part of our first endorsements process. And on the right, we have Ed Lazier, who's running for DC Council at large, who we are currently endorsing. You probably hear about organizations endorsing a candidate all the time. So, but what does that actually mean, and why do we care? Next slide. An endorsement is more than just a statement of support. It's a public commitment to organizing your volunteers to get a candidate elected. So candidates don't just build power to turn out voters through your stamp of approval, but they do need an army of people that can knock on doors, make calls to undecided voters, and spread the word. And that's how they win. Next slide. And when starting an endorsement process, there are often many internal conversations about who to endorse for an upcoming election, which can be hard to decide. But discussion is a really important part of this process within any organization. But why is that so important? So discussing who to endorse will help your group first and foremost build knowledge. It helps teach people within your group what policies candidates are prioritizing and supporting. And a part of this process, under that first sub-bullet point, is we often in DC, in our hub, but also many organizations around the country will often send out a survey or a questionnaire to their candidates, to anyone running, to get a sense of what policies they are prioritizing in their race, where they stand on different issues that matter to them. And this helps a group decide, are these candidates on our side? Are these candidates that we want to have a discussion with about maybe moving forward with an endorsement? Another thing an endorsement is really important for is building enthusiasm. Building enthusiasm, the more you talk about a candidate, within your group, the more your group will want to get out and volunteer for them. And this can help them win, obviously. And finally, discussions about endorsements help build relationships with candidates. So like Grace was saying, even good candidates aren't going to be all powerful magicians. They need our feedback. They need us to be engaged in the process about what we need and what our ideas are. And this helps them build their platforms. And so if we want to take just a few seconds, if people want to share some issues that they care about and that they are voting on or that they're watching in their elections in the chat, I can read them out. And I can also share some examples that we're watching in DC. So I'll give people like 20 seconds maybe to drop some issues that they're watching. I can give housing. Thank you, Sam. Defund the police. Yes. Thank you, Josh. Single payer healthcare. Electoral college. Yeah, that's a big one. Policing alternative. Yes. These are all great examples. I have many of these on my list. Rent control, like Sam said, defunding the police, public housing. All of these are really important issues that we'll be watching in our upcoming elections. All right, next slide. All right, so take a look at this slide. This is a really great illustration of why endorsements matter and how we underwent the process of deciding to start an endorsements process to begin with. If you look at the list under each of these candidates, check marks obviously indicating an issue that a candidate support and X's indicating issues that the candidate does not support. Can you think of like why it's important to endorse one of these candidates? What does that really serve to accomplish? Again, all these questions are like slightly rhetorical. I can answer them like Naeem said, but we like to hear your ideas. Sometimes they're slightly different than ours. Brian,
One question I have is,
Sure.
why does that Democrat not support any of these Democratic issues?
Yeah, definitely. So that's Brandon Todd. Brandon Todd was the Ward 4 city council member for many years. He was the incumbent and worked very closely with the mayor, who is also a Democrat, but has not stood very strong on any of these issues and has taken big money donations. So like Naeem was saying before, Democrats, aren't always very left. They're not always going to be very progressive on our issues, and often are swayed by the donations that they take. So Janice, unlike Brandon Todd, committed to a no Pepco pledge, Pepco being our utilities provider. And so committed to not taking donations from Pepco, as well as fossil fuel companies and other donors. So committed to public donations for her campaign. And so that's why primaries really matter. Yeah, thanks, Naeem. Primaries are really important because not all Democrats are created equal, and progressive legislation is not going to be seen equally by different Democrats. Next slide. And I'll pass it over to Naeem.
Yeah, thanks so much, Gabrielle, for really grounding us in so much of that about, why endorsements matter, what that means that we have to do, and how that could help us get a lot of those goals that had check marks next to them. Just super interesting that like everything that people brought up showed up on the next slide. So yeah, we want to get to know the candidates, right? We want to know who's going to put a check mark next to Green New Deal, who actually supports defunding the police versus who doesn't. And so Gabrielle mentioned earlier that questionnaires are an important part of that, right? Because it's like, you have a list of things that you want, right? And there might be anywhere between like 2 or 10 or sometimes more, right? In the at-large race, there's like in DC, there's like 20 candidates running. And we want to know which ones are even close to being on our side, right? Because we don't want to waste time talking to somebody like Brandon Todd, who's taking developer money, who's never going to be on our side, right? When there's like Janice, who obviously is, and then some other candidates who are kind of close, right? We might want to talk to. So what we'll often do is we take this questionnaire, right? It'll have things like, Why do you support defunding the police and why? Or do you and why? Do you support canceling rent during the pandemic? Why or why not, right? And then there will be lots of Green New Deal questions too, because we love that. And we'll send these out to the candidates to sort of filter out the candidates who are good or who support some of what we want from those who are not supportive of what we want. But beyond that, once you have an idea of the handful of candidates who could be good for your cause or who could care about your electoral issue, it's really important to talk to them, because then you can get a better understanding of why, right? You can get the full answer, you can get some elaboration, and answer any questions that your people might have. So another great way to do that is to host a town hall with those candidates who kind of get past that questionnaire. And those are really great because they're not just informative, and not only do you get to ask, Janice specifics about canceling rent, which she totally nailed that question. It was awesome. I dropped a picture of her below during that town hall. But it's also, really hype, and it energizes your group a lot to really hear candidates who are on your side. And oftentimes it's very clear which ones are and which ones aren't. So that's extremely motivating, right? And another thing that's really important is that once you get an idea of who's like better, who are good candidates, right, for a particular election and who aren't, right, you can have conversations within your group where you're kind of talking about, among these different candidates who are closer to where we are, right, should we endorse anybody? And if yes, who should we endorse and why? And so it's an interesting question because sometimes there aren't like any good candidates, right? There might maybe all the candidates are taking PEPCO money. Then we're like, oh, maybe we shouldn't endorse, ew. But then other times, right, you'll have a candidate like Janice or a couple of candidates who are, clean in terms of not having those conflicts of interest. Support you on some of the issues, and then there's some candidates who support you on all the issues. So it's really important to have those discussions within your group so that everybody's on the same page about where these candidates are standing and if they want to endorse and who they would want to endorse. The only thing I'll say about these discussions is it's super important to keep them constructive, right? And that way you can get a really strong idea of where these candidates stand, and nobody feels like they're being targeted. Because at the end of the day, it's about who's going to fight for us. So we try to ground ourselves in that. True, very true, Gabrielle. Always be kind. That is the realest advice ever. So yeah, you're part of a group, most likely. If you're not, then come chill with us. But yeah, vote on if or who you might want to endorse, right? If you're in a group, just discuss and discuss and discuss some more. Discuss which candidates could be allies if they're elected in terms of introducing what you want as legislation. But also discuss what endorsement could mean for your group. Endorsement can give your group and a candidate legitimacy. Let's say that there's a candidate like Ed Lazier who is running on banning all evictions, right? Banning all evictions during this pandemic. Well, that's a big deal because if we endorse him, then we're showing, yeah, we're in favor of banning all evictions during this pandemic. And on the flip side, if he gets our endorsement, right, because we happen to agree with him on a lot of the issues, that makes it really clear to people that he's taking a strong stance on environmental issues as well, which is also true. So think about how endorsement could affect how people perceive your group. Also, some really small fun fact for y'all: when you endorse as a group and then your candidate wins, that's not only the best feeling ever, but also every candidate in the city realizes, oh, endorsements matter. So that's always fun. But yeah, also just one final note on this: before you decide as a group whether or not to endorse, and if so, who, you definitely want to have a vote. You don't want it to be that 10 really vocal people in your group want to endorse a particular candidate and then the other 90 people or something don't want to do that. So at the end of the day, discussion is great. Once you've discussed, let the group decide, and we'll take it from there. So yeah, I want to hand it off to Gabrielle because she knows a lot about partnerships, and this is super interesting. You got it.
Thanks. Yeah, I just want to add on the endorsements process. It's not always obvious who to endorse, and sometimes it does take actually talking with the candidates and sometimes talking with other groups to figure out who is the best person to endorse. So for Janice, it was obvious, we knew right away, she's our gal. But for other candidates, we've had to really even after a town hall, they kind of seemed similar on the issues. Everyone was kind of saying similar lines. And in order to really understand who was actually best on the issues, we had to talk to other groups and figure out who was that person that was in the community and that was out there and had been in the community for years. And that's how we decided to endorse Ed Lazier. And so this just brings me into another really important aspect of the endorsements process, which is that you're not going to be the only person doing it. Sunrise might be experts on climate justice because that's our main issue. But what if we want to know which candidate is best on policing? We might want to talk to Black Lives Matter DC or Stop Police Terror Project. And what about healthcare? We might want to talk to our partners, SEIU 1199. And for wages, we would talk to Working Families Party, and so on and so forth. So we're always asking for advice. And the point is, different groups are going to be experts in different areas. So if you see your partners or other aligned groups endorse a candidate, ask them why. It's always great to reach out. And if they can't talk, they can't talk, but always ask. And like you, they went through a process to decide who to endorse, and they have good reasons for it. And not only that, when different aligned organizations endorse a candidate together or endorse the same candidate, this is going to give both your endorsements and the candidate more power and more legitimacy. Next slide. So Sunrise is, as I said, a climate justice group. We also work on a lot of other issues, but climate justice is our main issue. And BLM is a Black liberation group. Working Families Party and DSA are economic justice groups. And so we all have different goals and slightly different strategies or different communities that we're in contact with. And so given all of that, like, can we really work together? Like, how do we do that? Should we be working together? Next slide. Answer is a resounding yes. Yes, we should. When a candidate is really strong, like Janice Lewis George, and she cares about working for what the community wants, they're going to have something for everybody. It's also a prime illustration of how our issues are not isolated. Our goals aren't as different as they seem and often are going to be intersectional. So it's important to understand like how your issue exists outside the context of just your own group. Next slide. And finally, the most important part is when we fight together, we're going to win. Bringing people together from all of our demographics and communities to support a candidate who is fighting for all of us allows us to build power and win. Also on that note, I'll pass it back to Naeem to talk about what strategies we can use after we endorse a candidate.
Yeah, thanks, Gabrielle. Yeah, Gabrielle did like a really awesome job of illustrating how with our powers combined, we cannot be defeated. But yeah, the question becomes, what does the fight actually look like, right? How do you support your candidate of choice? Well, there are many ways, and we're going to talk about that. So this is what people call campaigning for a candidate or organizing for a candidate, right? This is what people think of when you say electoral organizing in many ways, although I hope you all have gathered there's a lot more to it. But yeah, all of these tactics in some ways come down to telling people where the candidate or official who you're campaigning for stands. And there's some traditional ways to do that, like phone banking, right? Hitting up all those voters on the voting rolls and talk to them about your candidate. There's canvassing, there's town halls, which we mentioned. There are mailers, which are those postcards you receive. There are yard signs. And there are also some digital strategies, which are a little bit newer, like email campaigns, where if you have a mailing list, you want people to know who you support and why. There's text banking, which is like phone banking, but for people who like texting. There are tweet storms for people who like tweeting. Gosh, I'm seeing a pattern here. There's so many ways to get involved. There are online trainings like this one, and then there are also virtual town halls, like the one that we talked about earlier with Janice. Before we keep on moving though, I just want to ask people, why do you all think that phone banking is in bold? Does anybody have like a guess as to why? You can drop it in the chat or hop off mute. Brian, you want to hop off mute and say that? Like, tell me what you think. True. Okay, yeah, I think people got it. Yeah, so Brian says it's one-on-one. True. Daisy says it's the most effective. Also true. Y'all know everything. Let's just go to the next slide. Yeah. So the reason why I bolded phone banking and why we care about phone banking, right, among all these different ways to talk to people, is because phone banking is by far, just empirically based on what has worked in the past for us and everybody else, it's by far the most effective way to reach the most people in the shortest amount of time and talk to them, have a conversation about your candidate and why your candidate the best. So basically what phone banking is, for y'all who are new to it, is calling a list of voters to convince them to support your candidate, because we don't win unless we change hearts and minds. And the thing is, y'all, there are a lot of people out there who are undecided. Maybe a lot of you here, right, if you live in DC or South Bend or Anchorage, Alaska, or wherever else, you may be very decided on who you want for city council because you're politically involved. A lot of people don't have the same context of everything you've discussed during your endorsements, or what are these top 3 issues this candidate is running on, and you have a chance to tell them that. So all you have to do to make your candidate win is call a bunch of random strangers who you've never met before. Oh boy, how do people feel about that? Can I just get some reactions in the chat? Katie, that's extremely positive, and I'm here for it. Does anybody else have any other reactions? If not, I'm just gonna assume that like a 4 out of 10 for comfort on the phone, true. Sam, important to have a hyped group with you. Yeah, do you want to explain why? I think that's a good point.
For me, at least, phone banking is definitely something that puts me a little bit out of my comfort zone in terms of talking to strangers. But I think that when you are like phone banking with like 3 or 4 people and like, I don't know, have like a group chat open sharing like interesting or successful calls, I think that that is like a good way to stay motivated.
Oh man, yeah, y'all are like the people who like read ahead in like book club and already know what happens. Yeah, so that's the thing, y'all. Calling strangers, it's not just for Sam, it's for everybody. It's for Sam, it's for Gabrielle, I bet it's even for Katie. It's definitely the case for me that calling random strangers is really awkward because it's not something you do in everyday life. And it's like I'm calling somebody who I don't even know to tell them to vote for a candidate who they might not have heard of for reasons that they might not ever have heard before, right? But the thing is, it's really important to acknowledge that discomfort before we can address it, because what it comes down to at the end of the day, right, is that through phone banking, and we did this for Janice multiple times, right, you can reach every single voter in the electorate. And what that is depending on, which election you're talking about, thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of undecided voters who are neutral, where if you talk to them about it, you might just have enough to say to change their mind. And that's how we change hearts and minds. That's how we win. That's how, as the headline says, the Sunrise Movement's phone banking operation is a force for change. So having said that it's awkward, let's talk about that. So yeah, Sam brought up some ways to make phone banking less awkward. I think that's very true. And yeah, like you said, one way to make that less awkward is to invite friends or partner organizations. Another great strength of partnerships is when you all do it together. It's more fun and less awkward for everybody. And also it's really important to have a chat going so that you can motivate each other, right? We usually have a chat going in our Slack or in some sort of texting app where we drop a star every time we talk to a supporter. And it's also fun sometimes to drop wacky stories. Like voters will tell you funny stuff and sometimes hopeful stuff. Like, oh, my biggest issue is, X, Y, or Z, but it's not just that I voted for Janice. I'll tell my mom, my dad, my sister, like everybody to vote. I'm like, oh, that's nice. So just sharing those stories keeps people motivated. But another important thing, right, since we're talking to phone bankers or potential volunteers in our groups to step up for this, is that we want to ask how long folks can reasonably commit. It's much better to have 10 people each commit half an hour than to have one person phone bank for 3 hours straight and get burned out. And so together, if we all contribute in a small way, we can make a big difference. So yeah, does anybody have any other tips for phone banking or making phone banking less awkward? I swear I'll write these down. Great.
Just one thing.
Oh, go ahead. Go for it.
Excuse me. Just the one thing that I have done in the past when I have phone bank is I will often like read through the script a bunch beforehand and then sort of like just talk it through, say it through a few times in my own words if I didn't mumble them, and then I'll usually like write out the whole script again. It's a lot of work, but I'll usually like rewrite the script as if I were to naturally say it, right? oftentimes the script can read a little bit like, here is the point that I am supposed to be saying. And I kind of like to phrase it a little bit more naturally. I find that I get some success that way. So that makes it both more fun for me. I feel more confident as a result too.
Oh yes, that is very real, John, making it natural and making it yours. Nice. And yeah, I saw some other great tips in the chat. Katie says, practice your smile before dialing. I guess that's fair. True, true. We want to be, you know, happy to be where we're at. Get a little hyped. I like that a lot. Yeah, push yourself to get outside your comfort zone because you're making real change. Nice. Ooh, Josh, yes, have a couple of personal stories ready about why you care. That's actually a really good transition to the next slide where we're going to talk about the conversation itself. So let's say you've taken some of the great tips that that John, that Gabrielle, that Katie, that many other people dropped there already, right? And those are all great tips, right, for making it less awkward. What about the conversation itself, right? There's just a couple of quick do's and don'ts that are helpful to keep in mind sometimes. And so let's start with the do's, right? Straightforward, something you definitely want to make sure you do, and John brought this up, right? In a way, is prep a brief pitch with the list of issues that your candidate is good on, and just think about what it is you're going to open with, right? And yeah, the campaigns will often have scripts, well, they always have scripts, but yeah, think about how you can make that a little more personal to you. What issues do you care about? So if I was phone banking for Ed Lozier, I would say that Ed Lozier is a candidate for DC Council at Large, and he's dedicated to divesting from police and investing in proven methods of public safety and affordable housing. He's in favor of canceling rent, and he supports a Green New Deal. So I support him because he's a champion on racial, climate, and housing justice. And so maybe for you, if you care about a different issue, your pitch might be different. But at the end of the day, you want to get in what helps people see that you care, right? And why you care. Ooh, yes, lots of good stuff in the chat. I like that. Yeah, get familiar with your candidate's self-interest. Katie, true. Gabrielle says, ask the caller questions to keep them engaged. Yeah, and create a connection. True, true. No worries, Mujen. Thank you for hopping on so much. But yeah, so those all kind of get to some of the other points here, right? Where it's like, right, do talk about something that your candidate is good on, that you care about, right? Tie it back to a personal story if that matters to you. Contrast with other candidates if that comes up, right? So, and along with the other tips in the chat, those are all great points. One thing to keep in mind is that there are some voters who are just not going to be interested. And if they say no and they're totally uninterested, that's totally cool. You know, we can move on to the next voter and spend our time on somebody who is open to that change and who will be open to your pitch. So yeah, just a couple of things to not do. We've learned from personal experience. You don't want to argue with or insult people. If anybody's ever been able to convince somebody by arguing or insulting them, drop a plus in the chat and I will be very impressed. Also, you don't want to make personal attacks on other candidates because we're here to say why our candidate is good, not dunk on other candidates for reasons that aren't related to the actual issues, right? So that's just a couple of do's and don'ts. You all had a lot of great tips and all that is super valuable. So just keep that in mind for your little pitch. Because right now, since we're all revving up to talk to a stranger about a candidate that we care about, we're going to practice it for 5 minutes in breakouts. So what we're going to do is we're going to break out into breakouts of, I think, 2 people just for the sake of time, maybe. And so basically, you can take a minute when you first get placed in to think about a candidate you support, and then think about why, right? If you had to open with a brief pitch, what would you say? And then your partner is going to pretend to be the person on the other end. Hopefully they'll be a nice person, but it'll help you get a feel for what this is like. And then you all will switch and the other person will give their pitch and then the first partner will react. And you can use our tips, which Katie can drop in the chat for you all. But yeah, we're going to be breaking out and talking to some strangers and changing hearts and minds. Does anybody have any questions before we do that? All right, that is awesome. So in that case, I'm going to break y'all into 7 rooms. So there will be one group of 3, but everybody else, you should only be with 1 person. And we'll see you back here in 5. Hello, everybody. Welcome back as we have folks trickling back in. Super excited to hear what you all discussed in your breakouts. or how, I guess, the conversations went. We'll give people like another 20 seconds to come back. Wow, folks must be really into their pitches. Like half of the people are still there, which is fine. That's a good thing.
Yeah, we're good on time.
Awesome, and we have people trickling back in. So yeah, welcome back everybody. Does anybody either want to come off mute and share or drop in the chat how that felt? What's your reaction? Was that easy or hard?
It's awkward. I always find it awkward practicing.
That's so real.
I'll jump in real quick. One thing that I enjoyed, this is Josh, he, him. One thing that I enjoyed was just, practicing how to pivot. I think that when you have a little bit of adrenaline and extra like blockage, in a live setting, if you haven't practiced that before, it's, it can be hard, it can be frustrating. And so testing that out, I think, kind of having a conversation partner who is unapologetically going to push you is really helpful. And so I want to thank Tiffany for helping me out with that. Encourage everyone to have practice, not just like with yourself in the mirror, but someone who will actually be skeptical for a moment or two.
I see that you had a very involved breakout. Oh, Gabrielle, what's up?
This is Tiffany. I was partnered with Josh, and I wanted to echo that. A good technique that he used is we were discussing, our presidential option, and I was playing the role of a kind of somewhat reluctant voter, and discussing the issues that were important to me around investing in communities, like funding the police at a much lower level, education, Medicare for all, and how I was concerned that Biden was not the guy for that. And then what he did, which was great, he talked about pivoting, is he then started talking about environmental issues and how while Biden wasn't on top of many other issues, that is one area where he did stand out from the other candidate. And he was kind of like, in my role, he was starting to persuade me before we got pulled back in. So I think that was good that he was able to identify, based upon the issues that I profess to be invested in, what other issues I might care about as well that might persuade me to actually go out and vote. Yeah.
Yeah, wow, nice. You all, that sounds awesome. Yeah, pushing each other, I guess just preparing for these different sorts of scenarios and just kind of, practicing that, right? That's actually a very interesting point. The last thing I'll say on this, y'all, and that was great feedback, and I'm glad that went well for y'all, is yeah, that's an excellent point. And oftentimes the campaigns will tell you, they'll train you separately on phone banking too. This is just like a taste of that. When you sign up to phone bank, right, they'll have trainings. But so it's also helpful to some folks to have like the issues page of your candidate open in another tab while you're phone banking. So that way, yeah, if something comes up or if somebody says, I'm into environmental issues, and you don't know a ton about that, you can have the page open and be like, well, candidate X, right, is really great on environmental issues, as a Green New Deal champion, if I'm talking about Ed or Janice or somebody. So yeah, excellent point. And all that being said, we've talked a lot about how you win, right? How when we organize, we can win. And I want to hand it off to Gabrielle to talk about what winning looks like and how we get there from all this work we're doing.
Yeah, and also just definitely want to echo what Tiffany and Josh said. Practicing with someone who pushes you is always so valuable, and learning how to pivot, and also like learning what matters to the person you're talking to, and like what Tiffany said, like what's going to motivate them to actually get out and vote. So like not just convincing them that you're right, because like that's not really what's important. What's important is like that they feel motivated to get up and vote. So that's just so important. But yeah, let's talk about winning and what that looks like. So here are some candidates that we're going to talk about that Sunrise has endorsed. So sometimes you win on your first try. Does anyone want to come off of mute and read some of these headlines for us? You can just like hop off. I can also read them. So the first one says a 28-year-old Hispanic woman, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, won her primary, defeating 10-term incumbent Joe Crowley in a massive upset. A progressive challenger was attacked for calling to defund the police. She won anyways, and that's our endorsement, Janice Lewis George. And then Jamal Brown wins New York primary in major victory for progressives. So these are all people that we endorsed and that they won unseating incumbents on their first tries, which is really, really exciting. Next slide. But sometimes you don't always win. There are candidates that we have endorsed that are obviously not going to win the first time around, and that doesn't mean that we stop trying. When you don't win, you have to keep coming back and trying again. Your issues are still going to need policymakers, and they're not going to sort themselves out between the time that someone else is elected and the next campaign. These issues are large. They take often, decades to solve fully, and they're still going to be around by the next election. So continuing that fight is really important. Cori Bush and Marie Newman both ran in 2018 and did not win their elections. They were both endorsed by Sunrise and they both lost. They ran on Medicare for All and a Green New Deal, but they didn't win their first try. So next slide. But they did win their second try. And if you don't give up, you will win. So Cori Bush won in Missouri in 2020, and Marie Newman won in, I'm blanking on where, in Illinois, in 2020, it says right there. And these were both really big wins for us. You have to keep coming back when you don't win. You have to keep trying again. The first time a candidate runs, they may not have that name recognition that the incumbent has. They may not be as well known in the community, and it really is hard to unseat an incumbent. People are more likely to vote for the person that they're more familiar with, and they're more likely to vote for the person who has already held the seat when they're undecided. So it's really, it is hard to unseat someone. But if you show up enough times and you stick out the issues and you're in the community and you're talking to people, you're going to be able to win. And these are both examples of races that we've endorsed that we really push hard for, that we phone banked for, and that we canvassed for, and that we were able to win. Next slide. And so, yay, we won. And that's it? No, definitely not the end. You have to continue building relationships with your elected officials. So even once they win, like I said before, elected officials are human. You have to build internal accountability and representation. You have to continue holding them accountable. So what if they don't follow through with their commitments that they made during their campaign? This is when we use some of those tools that we learned about in the first two trainings, and that's when we take action. This can be a direct action or something else. And alternatively, if they continue to not respond to the pressure that we're putting on them, we vote them out again. This hasn't happened for us, Sunrise, yet, but we're a new group, and if it does happen, we're prepared to show up and organize and vote for someone that will listen to us. And if they do follow up on their commitments, your relationship still isn't over. We have one of the really important parts of electoral organizing is that when you create these relationships with your candidates, it gives us sway and leverage and influence on what our elected officials are doing and how they represent us. And so we get a say in what happens behind those closed doors that are often so hard to breach for normal people, for people that aren't working on the Hill. And so we get a say in drafting laws and legislation, and that can be really, really exciting and can make these policies reflect our communities. Yeah, and I'll pass it over to Naeem to talk about next steps.
Yeah, thanks so much, Gabrielle. I always love hearing about winning, and it is great that we do a lot of it. And now you all know how to get there too. Yeah, so what comes next? We talked about how you win, what winning looks like, what strategies, what electoral organizing works. Well, what we talked about is in many ways just an intro to electoral organizing, because many of y'all, especially if you haven't done this before or haven't done this with a group before, might feel like you still have a long way to go. So we definitely invite you to join us to canvass or phone bank for a candidate. We're going to talk about that in just a sec for next step. And we'll also drop the links so you can sign up now if you want to, but we'll also be sending them out in the follow-up email. Really quickly, Rising Organizers has a Get Out the Vote youth training this Saturday too, which is super important. And there is a bit.ly there, which Katie can drop in the chat. So if you're a youth voter and you want to provide expertise on how we can get more people involved in the Get Out the Vote effort, right? Get more people who are from our demographic to vote, definitely come out to that. That's super important. We also have more. So if you are just super eager to phone bank and text bank, Sunrise Movement DC has endorsed Ed Lazier because he's running on defund police, on banning all evictions forever, which is great, on having stronger rent controls and a Green New Deal. So if any of those things are things that you like and you'd like to support a candidate for DC Council who's going to do that, definitely join us for a phone or text bank. We have text bank trainings on October 6th, 11th, 20th, and the 25th. And there's a link there which we will send out after this call, and which Katie might also be able to drop in the chat if you don't mind. And we also have a ton of phone banking opportunities coming up every Wednesday and every Sunday. So every Wednesday from 5 to 8 p.m. or every Sunday from 2 to 5 p.m. we have people phone banking, and it's an organized effort. You don't have to stay the whole time, but we recommend joining at the beginning if you've never done it before, so you can learn how to use the phone banking tool. And then from there, folks will usually stay however long they're able. Remember, like that could be 45 minutes, an hour. If you're short on time, it could be 30 minutes, but every little bit makes a difference. And that's how we change stuff. We have one more thing for you. If you miss walking up to people in person, we have a very COVID safe, masks required outdoors community canvases on October 4th and 24th. And we'll send out more information on that pretty soon. But if you want to learn more about that or about any of these next steps to canvass for Ed or phone bank for Ed or anything else that Sunrise is doing electorally, I recommend that you fill out our welcome form, which is bit.ly/SunriseDC welcome form, capitalized like that. And I think Katie's down to drop that in the chat too, maybe. She's wonderful. Thank you so much, Katie. And last but certainly not least, okay, we've talked about a lot today. Y'all have been a swell audience. We're gonna close this out like how we close out a lot of stuff, and that is with a song, because that helps lift your spirits and, you know, gets you moving, right? So if you've never sung on Zoom before, how it works is first I want all of y'all to go on mute, because Zoom only lets you hear one person at a time. And how it's basically going to go is I'll lead the song, so that way when we sing together, you'll be able to hear me and you'll be able to hear yourself. So that's two people, but you'll be able to see everybody singing along, so you still get as much community as one can get over Zoom. So it might help if we do like call and response the first time. So let's just kind of go through like each line. I'm going to sing it, then I'm going to point, and your wonderful muted selves will sing it. And then after we feel like we know the lines well, we'll go through and do it together. People feeling good? All right, I'm so excited for this, legitimately. So this song is called Blessed Harmony, and it is by Annie Zylstra. And so here's how it goes. I'm going to sing and then I'm going to point and you're going to sing. Get ready. I believed in solid ground, until I saw the earth in motion. In the winds of steady change. in the ever-rolling ocean. All right, that sounded great to me. I couldn't hear anything, but I could see your enthusiasm. So we're gonna do it together this time, just all singing together without those pauses. And yeah, here we go. 3, 2, 1. I believed in solid ground until I saw the earth in motion. In the winds of steady change, in the ever-rolling ocean. Repeat, I believed in solid ground until I saw the earth in motion. In the winds of steady change, in the ever-rolling ocean, I believed in solid ground until I saw the earth in motion. In the winds of steady change, in the ever-rolling ocean. Y'all sounded dope. That was great. Give yourselves some snaps. Huge shout out to our wonderful audience today, to all of y'all wonderful people lending your wonderful voices to make a difference in the electoral realm, and also just being awesome at singing, because that's what y'all are. I couldn't hear you, but I could see your enthusiasm, and that's what matters. Yeah, so thank you all so much for coming out, for lending us your time. We're going to have a few minutes for questions in case anybody has any quick questions you want everybody to hear. But otherwise, hope that all of y'all have a wonderful evening. So yeah, thanks everybody. And you can stick around if you have questions. We're happy to answer them. Yeah.